Hello everyone, welcome back. So we're going to be discussing linear perspective. So it's the next step after learning all these different methods of drawing with line. So we did blind, we did modified contour, we did sketching, we did line variation, we did cross contour line, and you're all loving it. So now we want to help show you how to draw your objects in perspective as well as spaces, and the kind of distortions that we take for granted that we see every day, but that aren't necessarily actually there. So to kind of sum it up, and when you guys are reading in your textbook, I think the best line here in the starting of Session 7's chapter is, things appear differently to us than what they actually are. So we're going to embrace this truth. It is an essential key to understand the principles of linear perspective and its importance as a concept in perceptual drawing, or drawing from life. So with that idea in mind, we're going to start off pretty simple. We're going to start off with 1-point perspective. And I don't know if you can see here in the background, I have a square piece of paper, and that's what we're going to start with. So it's this idea of what we think we see versus what's actually going on. And so this idea of the distortion that occurs because something is at a distance from us, but how can we describe that? How can we show that? And then that idea of this three-dimensional space, this is real life, how do we then describe that on a flat 2D surface? Okay, so we'll start off with that. So let me bring the camera over here, and what we're going to be doing is we will be describing that square sheet of paper. And what I wanted to show you though was, how do I make that square sheet of paper? I know that may sound kind of silly, but some of you, this might actually challenge you. But think of this as kind of like arts and crafts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to make that square piece of paper. So it's pretty easy. So what you're going to do is just get a common everyday 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You guys use this, K through 12. You probably still use it today at your job. And so on the long end, the 11, you're going to remove a certain amount of paper so that overall your paper is, so this is 8.5 and you want to make this 8.5. So all I'm going to do is I bring 0 to the edge and I measure up to 8.5 inches and I make a mark. I do it one more time, so I have 2 points. So 0 up to 8.5 inches, make a second mark, and there it is. And then from here, you can see I've got my 2 marks. I can now take my straight edge, and that's what I'll be trimming off. And to trim it off, it's really easy. You can use a pair of scissors, you could use your X-Acto knife, whatever. So I'm just going to use scissors because most of you probably have scissors. And I just trim off this short edge. And then voila, a nice square. And so we already have that over there. So let me get this stuff out of the way. Alright, then the next step is to actually draw what we're seeing. And what that means is, when I bring the camera up to our square here, as you're looking at that, you're like, oh yeah, a square. I know what a square looks like. It's the same, all 4 sides are the same. So when I come here to my drawing paper, and I'm looking at my square, and I'm like, yeah, so I know what a square is. So I'm just going to rough in a square that's got 4 equal sides. Just sketch it out. And then alakazam. So there's my square. So that's what I know a square looks like. But then when I go back, it's like, well, wait a minute. That doesn't look like my square. What's going on? So here's where the distortion occurs. That idea that as things go back into space, and you see how that square is laying on a flat surface on that bath towel, it's not actually square. So the only time it would be like it is in my drawing is if I had it positioned in this manner. But because it's in space, on a surface, away from us, it's now in perspective. So how do I draw that? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. So one thing we can do is we can look for these distortions. What we can do is we can bring two pencils up, and so I'm behind the camera and I'm extending my arms out, and then in front of you is this idea of this imaginary piece of glass that's in front of you, like a large window, and that's the picture plane that we're looking through, and wherever our eyes move, that imaginary picture plane moves with them. And so because the glass is in front of us, we can't tip our pencils forward, but we can tip our pencils left and right. So depending on what you're doing, what you can do now is, having them straight up, we can tip them together, and we lay from this distance these pencils along those two edges, and if I bring the pencils up, you can see that there's my vanishing point. And my vanishing point is a single point here in 1 point perspective, where those two angles of the paper go back into ambiguous space, and at the horizon line, which is also your eye level, is where those angles would converge to. Okay? So at this distance, in my standing position, my station point, my point of view, this is how I read and see the distortion of this square laying on that flat surface in front of me. So I can take these angles and apply them to my drawing. Okay? But there's other considerations to take into factor here. You want to do something called measuring the angles, but you also want to measure the proportions of this. So what you can do is you can use your pencil as a measuring tool along with your thumb. You just bring the pencil down to the paper. The tip of the pencil will go at the top of the paper here, and then you move your thumb up to the bottom of the paper. So from this distance, the paper is this tall, or that long. And then I can take that measurement and work it this way. 1, 2. So from this distance, one of these equals 2 of these. And what I've now created is a measuring ratio 1 to 2. And I can take that now and apply that to my drawing. And what's interesting is, if you establish the ratio here, when you go to do the ratio on your drawing, you remember earlier in the semester we talked about scale and proportions. You can scale your drawing up to any size, when you're looking through your viewfinder. So if I come over here to my drawing, I can now apply that ratio, and I can make it any size I want as long as it's 1 to 2. So what I can do is I can take the length of my pencil and I put my fingers at the halfway point and I make a mark. Okay? And I look to see where my thumb is down here, and I make another mark there. Okay? So there's the 1. And then, since that's half of my pencil, and I want 2 of these halves, so from here I just turn my pencil, there's the 1 half, and there's the second half. So now I have 1, 2, and just 1. So 1 to 2 is my ratio. Okay? Clear as mud? I hope it isn't. So I have these 2 points here that indicate my 2. And then here to here is the 1. So now I have a line, but I need to figure out what are my angles that go back to the back edge of my paper. Okay? So if I return back, to my still life here, again, I bring my pencils up Remember, you don't want to tip them forward. You want to tip them together so they only back and forth like windshield wipers. And you find the angles. And then you would take this angle at arm's length and then translate them over here in the drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the camera back so you can see that, because I need two hands to do it. Okay, so let's get that up. And then I'll bring the camera up so you can then actually see the marks. Alright, so I'm going to kind of stand in front of you here, but I bring my pencils together at arm's length, and then I tip them together like windshield wipers to get the angles of the sides of the paper, and then I bring that to my picture plane right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this side and do that angle first. So I just I put my thumb at the corner and I have the angle, and then I just make a mark. I dip my pencil to make a mark. And then I'm going to connect the dots. Okay? I'm going to return here and do the other side. I'll tip my pencils again, and then bring that angle back over here, and do the same thing on the left side. I'll tip my pencil, and put my thumb down here. I have the angle. Again, you have to keep this at arm's length. And then I have where I connect the dots. Okay? So let me bring the camera closer. So there's my angles applied based on, this standing position. And now, if you notice right here, where my pencil point is the top edge of the paper, or the farthest away edge. And I basically would just make a horizontal line across. So let me change hands here with the camera. So here's that mark. And I just make that line across. So there, now the paper, the sheet of square paper, has now been measured, and the angles have been sighted. I can get rid of this extra lines, and then there's the finished product. I could take my eraser and clean up the sketch lines, but for the most part I'm done. So if I come back, you notice there's my first square drawing. It's based on what I know what a square looks like, but then drawing the same square with the idea of that square over there, using linear perspective and applying it by measuring and sighting angles to get it to look like that distortion of the piece of paper going back into space. Okay? So again, just to repeat, when you go to measure, use your pencil to measure. So from this distance, I put the pencil tip on the top edge of my paper, the farthest away, and then I bring my thumb up to the bottom edge of the paper. So that's 1, and then I take that 1 and see how many of those makes the ratio, and it turns out from this distance it's 1 to 2. Okay? And then I come to my drawing, and again, I can scale my drawing to any size. I can do, a billboard that's on the side of I-15 all the way down to just this 9x12 sheet of paper. And so, again, my pencil is actually held at the halfway point, and I use that as 1, and then I use this twice to make the 2. So there's the ratio. So I blew this up compared to what was over there. Okay, so I hope that makes sense in terms of measuring, just repeating it. And then, since I'm holding the camera, I'll just do it with one pencil. From this distance, at arm's length, I can hold the pencil, tipping it like a windshield wiper along the edge of that paper, so it's going back into space, and then keeping that particular angle at arm's length, and then applying it to my picture plane here on my paper, and then making the mark, and then stroking the line, connecting the dots. Okay? So that is how to measure and sight the angle in one-point perspective, and this idea of based on what you know versus the distortion. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope that was insightful and helpful.